So, welcome everyone to Great Decisions. Today we have our topic is U.S. changing leadership of the world economy. It's been a morning, as you can tell, and we are excited that we get to partner. I'm Kate Jacobson with Ramsey County Libraries, where I'm the history coordinator, and I partner with Global Minnesota and the Foreign Policy Association for the Great Decision Series. This is looking at the most critical international issues facing America, and today's topic is, as I said, U.S. changing leadership of the world economy. Our speaker today is Richard Leitch. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but he is a professor. He earned a BA in East Asian Studies from Colby College, and a Master's of Arts in Asian Studies from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and he has a PhD in Political Science from Illinois. He currently teaches at I just lost it here. He's currently teaches at Gustavus Adolphus, and he teaches everything from international relations, comparative politics, Asian politics, environmental politics, and the politics of poverty. So we'll turn things over to Richard.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for inviting me today. If I remember correctly, I think this is my fourth or fifth time with the OLI group, so it's nice to be back with all of you. As you know, Global Minnesota is the organization that sponsors the Great Decisions program. And last year we were asked to give a series of slides for all of the audiences that we would present to. And I will just show you those 5 or 6 slides right now. I'm not going to read them, but I'll put them up on the screen long enough so you can read them yourself. Global Minnesota is truly an international perspective organization that has many programs, and I'm hoping that you could become involved beyond Great Decisions, even though, of course, Great Decisions is a very valuable program that they run, but that is what Global Minnesota is. Look at all those smiling faces. That's wonderful. Please note the third bullet point there. The views expressed by Great Decision speakers are their own opinions. And that is certainly the case with the presentation for today. I'm not speaking on behalf of Global Minnesota or the Great Decisions program more broadly, but I certainly have my own thoughts about what we are seeing in the world today, especially the U.S. role leading the world economy. And a very easy to remember web address at the very top of the page. So maybe you can jot that down. And before I go on, as Kay said, I am a professor at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota. I teach in the political science department. And if any of these PowerPoint slides, or in fact, the entire PowerPoint presentation is of interest to you, please send me an email. I'm very easy to find on the internet. If you remember, just my first name is Richard, and you learn how to spell Gustavus. That's probably the hardest part of it. If you type in Richard Gustavus, my face will appear along with my contact information. So certainly, please feel free to send me an email, and this PowerPoint will be sent off to you as the attachment to the reply email. Okay, so here's what we're thinking about. As Kay said, the chapter title is The Evolution of U.S. Leadership in the Global Economy, Dilemmas and Choices. And this was somewhat similar to the photograph that was in the chapter on the first page. On that picture, they were not waving. In this one, they are. I couldn't find a high resolution version, but this is at the Quad Summit in Tokyo in 2022. The Quad Summit includes Australia, the United States, Japan, and India. And it started in the early 2000s, but it was dormant until former President Joe Biden revived it. And that was a direct result of the collective concern of those four nation state leaders of the rise of China, or the threat that China was presenting to their respective nation states. So as Kay said, and I'm sorry, I should have asked this before, as Kay said, we'll take questions and answers and have some kind of discussion at the end. But I usually do this for any class I teach at Gustavus. I ask the students before we get into it if anybody has any preliminary thoughts or questions about the chapter. And I suspect there's no way that you can unmute yourself and just express those now if you do have any. So maybe we can just hold those to the end. So here is some context. Again, if you want this entire PowerPoint, let me know. And I'm assuming you can see what's up on the screen there. But even if you read only the first column, that's really enlightening, I think. A tomato tiff between the United States and Mexico, thinking about Florida growers of those competitor tomatoes. This is going to maybe ignite a trade war, really? Well, if you go over to the third column, we're stunned, we're completely stunned, says somebody who is a importer of 200 million pounds of tomatoes that are produced in Mexico. And that's going to hurt his company, but he believes it's also going to hurt Mexican farmers and also the US consumer. So why am I putting this up here for context? Well, certainly it is dated, but I don't want anyone in this room or this virtual site to think that tariffs and other things like quotas and non-tariff barriers to trade are things that just suddenly evolved when Donald Trump became the president. This was during former President Barack Obama's time in office. But it certainly is head spinning, at least it is for me, the amount of information that is out there regarding Trump's vision of how the world should be ordered, and trying to keep up with all of the details. The barrage, it literally is overwhelming. But in just one day, just for illustration purposes, this was yesterday, February 27th, 2025. I saw this in the second section of the Wall Street Journal. You can see that headline, bold as day, right there. Tariffs divide aluminum industry. Who is going to benefit? Who is going to suffer? Here's another one, also from the Wall Street Journal. Now he's decided that he's going to target the EU, and they're not going to take it sitting down in case that does happen. They're going to have some kind of retaliatory policy against the United States and exports from the US. This was not yesterday, but this is going to relate to what was in yesterday's Wall Street Journal or Star Tribune. I forgot which one it is, but look at that face of Zelensky on the left. It looks like he's almost accepted defeat, and not defeat from the Russian military, of course, but the browbeating by Washington, D.C. Now, Donald Trump has decided that Ukraine has something valuable that the United States wants or needs, and those are rare earth elements and other minerals that we, I guess, will mine, or Ukraine will mine them. This is several years into the future of infrastructure development, quite honestly, in the amounts that Donald Trump is talking about. But essentially what we are reading here is that we are not going to support you in your war effort against Russia unless we have some kind of binding agreement giving us access to those minerals. Unprecedented. For me, at least. Maybe during your lifetime, you've seen something similar, or maybe my memory isn't so good. Who knows? But to say to an ally, despite the rampant corruption in Ukraine, we all knew about it even before the Russian invasion, but still, if we're going to support them monetarily, Donald Trump believes that there's got to be some kind of payback. Zelensky assumes that those were grants. Donald Trump has boasted that we gave Ukraine $500 billion. Most people think that it's closer to 135 billion, whatever the case. But again, this would be unprecedented, that we are asking somebody for an IOU, essentially, in the form of access to their minerals on their own territory. And this also appeared yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. Avowed protection is confirmed by Senate for the top post, that is the US Trade Representative. And you can't see it probably on the screen, so I blew it up for you in the next slide. But here is a very interesting phrase, and we saw this in the reading for today. If you happen to have a chance to do the reading for today, Dresner was talking all about the paradigm shifts that have happened in the world economy that during our lifetime has been led by the United States. And are we seeing one right now? Or will we not recognize that we are seeing one until it's actually happened? So, yeah, he gives a reference to Thomas Kuhn and the paradigmatic revolutions. So here was the first one that Dresner cited, the Bretton Woods system. And it started what was called, at least in Dresner's terminology and others as well, embedded liberalism. So this is right before the end of World War II, all the way to 1971. And you might be saying, well, why was 1971 the end of what was called embedded liberalism? That was because, as we well know, the Vietnam War was raging, and Richard Nixon had to have a way to fund the Vietnam War, and the United States started printing a lot of dollars. You might remember that. We also remember wage and price controls to combat inflation. I remember that very well. But prior to 1971, there was this understanding that any country that had US dollar holdings could exchange those dollar holdings for gold. And that was the end of that Bretton Woods understanding in 1971. Nixon said, we are no longer going to be able to abide by this previous agreement, and you can't convert your dollars to gold. So as a result, a lot of countries were stuck holding what they believed to be worthless dollars, or at least inflated dollars. But the US dollar is still the world's #1 reserve currency. You can see that no other currency is even close. So there's the US dollar at the top. And yes, we see peaks and valleys there as far as how many nation states are actually counting on the US dollar to hold some kind of value. And we see the same with all of the other currencies that are listed there. But if you look at the Canadian dollar, for example, it pales in comparison to the US dollar as far as foreign currency holdings of other governments. So the US dollar is essentially still the world's reserve currency. Although there have been efforts by other outlier or rogue nation states to create a alternative reserve currency, particularly Russia wants to do that. And you might be saying, well, why does it matter if the US dollar is the world's reserve currency? Well, most gold transactions are conducted in dollars, but also more significantly for our day-to-day life, most oil transactions are conducted in US dollars. So anyone who wants to trade in oil, petroleum, whatever, they are going to need US dollars as a reserve. So some people have said this in the international relations world. What about the US dollar? How long is it going to survive as the reserve currency? And what about cryptocurrency? And I put up here thoughts. And again, not knowing that you can't weigh in on this, and maybe at the end you can tell me what you think, but I'm a little bit suspect. In fact, I'm leery of cryptocurrency. It's not that I am technophobic, but just the whole assumption about how it has any type of value leaves me a little bit puzzled. But if we were to think about cryptocurrency becoming the world's reserve currency, I just have to think about this. Of course, our first family selling their own version of meme coins, which is typical, I guess, of them trying to benefit from their being in power, but it's also a type of cryptocurrency. You can see there, if you want, again, I can send this to you, but the Trump token stood at about $8 billion. Yeah, I guess, well, if you look at today's price of a Trump token, it's about $12, and his wife's competing meme currency is $1. So they've certainly taken a huge hit. So you can see up here when this was published, $44 to $12. I hope people in this space, this virtual space, didn't invest when it was $44, because you just saw a depletion of most of your holdings. But there might be people in his circle of friends who would promote this. Let's make Donald Trump's meme coin the reserve currency, or thinking about his bluster, he might argue the same thing. It should be my meme that would do it. They want to turn the president's birthday into a new federal holiday. That sounds like something out of Venezuela with Nicolas Maduro, for example. I know that that's the case legally in Japan. The present sitting emperor's birthday is a national holiday, but Donald Trump is not the emperor of Japan. And here's another example of how people want to exalt and or revere Donald Trump. There's a place for Mount Rushmore for his face to appear. Somebody could chisel it out. You've got to be kidding me. So for me, at least, again, I am not speaking on behalf of Great Decisions or Global Minnesota, but when it comes to Donald Trump, all bets are off. There's the competing meme coin, Melania. I don't even know how to say that. $ Melania, Smelania. I don't know. But he was upset. You can see he's got a grudge. This is the inauguration, the day before she launches her coin. He sees his value go down, and look at what a miserable person. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm cleansing the mental palate with that lime sorbet image. But even if embedded liberalism was starting to crack in 1971, we have to recognize that the Cold War was still raging and the US faced a new economic threat. So the Cold War was raging. We were trying to make countries democratic, to make the world safe for democracy. We thought the best way to do that was to try to ramp up or prop up their economies. And we did that very successfully after World War II with Germany, but particularly in the case of Japan. And Japan did represent a new economic threat to the US economic supremacy until the mid-1980s, when Ronald Reagan, serving in his second term in office, said to his counterpart, Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone of Japan, he said, you've been taking advantage of this system with a depreciated currency, which makes your exports far cheaper for our American consumers than the domestic versions. And you've got to do something about that. Well, what happened, similar to the Washington Naval Conferences of 1922, which might ring a bell for some of you, Japan was essentially strong-armed at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, right in the corner of Central Park. And what became known as the Plaza Accord of September 1985, it revalued the currency of Japan. And that meant that it became stronger. So over time, Japanese consumers became wealthier because they could buy more things that were foreign things. So this is when we saw the absurdities of Japanese, now very wealthy people, bidding up the prices for masterpiece Van Goghs, for example, or purchasing Rockefeller Center or purchasing Pebble Beach. Those were all through Mitsubishi Real Estate. But they had a lot of money, at least on paper they did. And then we saw the inflated land bubble in Japan. The bursting of that bubble in Japan has never been able to recover. But why am I telling you any of this? The whole thought that I'm trying to get across here is that there were rarely times in modern history when we had anything that appeared to be a free market system of capitalism, where nation states traded with each other with almost no regulations, no restrictions. And this is, again, a very extreme example of when one sovereign nation state is bullied by other sovereign nation states because of their economic inability to compete, or what they think is unfair, or to use the jargon of Donald Trump, you are treating us very unfairly, Japan, and you've got to do something about it. And Japan complied. And just as a sidebar here, Trump and Marla Maples, this was wife number 3, they married at the Plaza Hotel, which, as another sidebar, Donald Trump owned at the time. So then with the end of the Cold War, the Washington Consensus applied to post-Soviet and the global South economies. So the hallmarks of that belief about how the US could continue to lead the world economy was based on deregulation. That essentially means make the market function, get the government out. Privatization, which means that you are turning over state-owned assets to private owners, and then balanced budgets. throughout the Dresdner article, you might see the word hypocrisy, especially at the end. Well, there is a perfect example of it. The United States started running budget deficits. We didn't have balanced budgets, not only at the national level, but many state governments weren't running balanced budgets. But we were telling the rest of the world that they had to have a balanced budget to not be a dysfunctional economy. And if they had that, then they would more likely become a democracy. So deregulation, privatization, balanced budgets. You might remember this. I can put these three people up on a screen in today's era, and most people have no idea who any of those people are, but even the person in the middle, they have no idea. And if I say, well, that's Al Gore, they still totally clueless, no idea. And I'm not trying to demean my students at all, but they just don't know who he is. Well, you might remember this succession of very public NAFTA debates in the early 1990s. When people were saying, you know, should the US do something like this? Should we not? Blah, blah, blah. Who's it going to help? Who's it going to hurt? And people mocked Ross Perot, who was the candidate for the Reform Party. You might remember that. That was probably the last major third party we had in this country, and it was only temporary. But Ross Perot was talking about this great sucking sound, and you can still see those debates on YouTube. If you type it in, you will see Ross Perot talking about how there are no labor standards, no environmental standards. Capital is going to move from north of the border to south of the border. So from the US to Mexico, we're going to lose all these jobs in manufacturing in the United States. And people were just kind of looking at him. And there's one moment in one of those debate films that, again, archived, where Bill Clinton kind of looks at him and smirks like, oh, you dumb old fool, kind of thing. Well, you know what? In retrospect, Ross Perot was right. We did lose a lot of manufacturing jobs. A lot of capitalists did become very wealthy as a result of NAFTA. So here was Bill Clinton trying to sell it. This is elder Bill Clinton now. He didn't have that same color hair when he was the president, but he said a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, that's great if you have fishing line long enough to get to the bottom where the fish might be, if they're bottom swimmer fish like codfish or flounder or something. But a lot of nation states on those boats don't have long enough line to catch them. So Bill Clinton didn't come up with that idea. Most people attribute it to John F. Kennedy. And just read this out loud if you want with that Hyannis Pot accent. Yeah, we have been partners in adversity. Yes, okay, I guess. So is NAFTA really going to create partners in prosperity, or some going to win and some going to lose? This is former Mexican President Carlos Salinas, Harvard educated, not a dummy by any means, and certainly Bill Clinton, Yale educated. So there are two Ivy League graduates side by side representing their respective countries. And Carlos Salinas is now recognized as one of the most autocratic and the lowest approval rating president in recent Mexican history. But he was an advocate for NAFTA. And one of the things he did as a result of becoming, or his country becoming part of NAFTA, is he had to rewrite the Mexican Constitution to allow for deregulation and privatization of what Marxists would call the means of production. Well, in a very poor country like Mexico, the primary mean of production is land. And all of these red squares here represent what are called ejidos. Ejidos were considered community property that community members could decide what they were going to use it for. And nobody was the primary determinant of how that would be used. Maybe, you know, sure, but at least in theory, everybody collectively decided how that land would be used. But once 1991 came along and the Mexican Constitution was rewritten, all of that ejido land was privatized, meaning that people who had no legal rights to be on that land were suddenly pushed off the land. They became landless people as a result of NAFTA. And that was one of the conditions of Mexico's inclusion in NAFTA, that they had to get rid of ejido land. So for a farmer like this fellow who's farming wheat, I think that's wheat, but anyway, he's got money. He can go in and buy ejido land. You know, funny, haha. the NAFTA agreement, I guess, wasn't sufficient enough for Donald Trump, so he renegotiated it and wanted to rename it USMCA. Fine. But here is the human face of NAFTA and the Washington consensus in general, as I wrote up there. There are push and pull factors of migration. Like it or not, everyone on the planet, you're pulled into the capitalist system. And I'm not saying that because I'm an anti-capitalist or a Marxist. I'm not. My wife is an entrepreneur. She's very good at what she does. And certainly I'm not a communist, if you want to think of Cold War labeling. But here is a woman who was pushed off her land. What is she going to do? Well, you can see now that she's reduced to begging on the street. She's got a plastic cup in her hand and she's going to get some kind of handout from somebody. But I guess her other path that she could take would be to work in one of these big companies, a factory that's close to the US-Mexican border called a Maquiladora. You've probably heard of them. So suddenly all this capital, like Ross Perot predicted, is going from the north of the border to the south of the border. And all of these people are brought in, either pushed off the land or pulled into those factories with the thought that they're going to make more money or have a better quality of life or a more secure life or something. So there is this massive movement from rural Mexico to now urban, close to the border of Mexico. And you can see how many people were employed in maquiladoras, even as late as 2000. And you're saying, well, what do you mean as late as 2000? Well, it took a while for things to develop. And then once China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, that liberalized China's economy and made it easier for capital to flow into China. So a lot of these people ended up losing their jobs. But in about-face reversal, a lot of them, different group of people, but a lot of workers in Mexico ended up getting their jobs back because a lot of people assumed that even with transportation costs from China to outside of China, particularly the US, that wouldn't overwhelm the amount of potential profit. Well, actually, it did. So here is a woman and a bunch of women working at maquiladoras, hemming T-shirts that are going to be sold who knows where. Same idea here, women who are working on electronic motors, or excuse me, monitors that are going to be used in some something. But anyway, yeah, so here again, this is kind of ironic. Now that he is back in the Oval Office, Donald Trump is pushing for early renegotiation of US trade deal with Mexico and Canada. And it's not up for review until 2026. And I'm standing there quizzically, scratching my head, not truly, but dramatically, but thinking, wait a minute, buddy, you were the one who was all about the USMCA, and you thought it was the greatest deal ever and all this other stuff that he was spewing, and now he wants to renegotiate it. So stand by, people. But here's what Dresner says. This is true. Yes, that linkage has been severely weakened. The United States really can't be counted on as being the spokesperson for free and fair markets, that's for sure. And what really disturbs me is that the rest of the world has concluded that US foreign policy is mirroring whatever this person's values and visions are. And that's it, that there is no control over whatever he wants to do. And that we've done a complete roundabout just because of one person. I would like to think that's not the case, but each passing day, I am less and less hopeful. I don't know who, if anyone, is standing up to him. And that's just my own commentary again. But anyway, it's more similar to an autocracy, authoritarian form of government, whatever word you want to use. But we are not Russia with Vladimir Putin in charge with a sham election. We are not Kim Jong-un in North Korea in charge with no election at all. We're the United States. We would like to think that we have some kinds of checks and balances, if you think about just the order of things in our country, but do we really have that? I'm not sure. So here we are. Here are our top 10 export partners, Canada and Mexico. Yeah, so think about all of the American interests that are benefiting from that trade between Canada, US, Canada, Mexico. And Trump has said, we're going to tariff them. We don't care. This just appeared earlier this week. What's going to happen? Who's going to benefit? Donald Trump honestly believes the tariffs are going to go to the US Treasury and benefit our bottom line. And he thinks that governments pay those tariffs, but we know that they don't pay those tariffs. They're paid at the port of entry, and the customs agent is receiving those tariff payments from somebody who is the importing agent. And, yeah, that's what happens. And then the costs are passed on to us as consumers. So I thought this was very interesting. It just appeared a few days ago. But the US imports from Mexico, China, Canada, the rest of the world, well, you can see that the rest of the world still dominates. That's the plurality. But we still do get a lot of things from Mexico and China and Canada, no doubt. But they are much more dependent on us than we are on them, with the exception of China. So Canada exports a lot of things to the United States, and so does Mexico. And what's going to happen to their people if Donald Trump's vision of tariffs, beautiful tariffs, this bold, beautiful bill that's going to pass Congress, if it comes to fruition? John Mearsheimer, this name might sound familiar or look familiar because he's contributed to past Great Decisions volumes. But John Mearsheimer is a realist. He believes in great power politics. For just a quick definition, but he thinks that the world is ordered by those most important nation states, and their values are going to prevail, and we eventually will see a hegemonic power of the world. But he said this not so long ago. Yeah, there is no precedent for a great power encouraging the rise of a potential hegemonic competitor. This appeared in Time magazine, you can see, in 2017. But years earlier, there was this person who came out of the woodwork in China. His name was Deng Xiaoping. And it's a different type of writing system in the earlier version to Romanize Chinese names. So this is how it would appear. But now it would be Deng Xiaoping. But anyway, is he a friend or foe? And that's what Time was asking rhetorically. Is he a friend or foe of the United States? There is Jimmy Carter. And when Deng Xiaoping visited the United States, Jimmy Carter was saying, here is somebody who is certainly the leader of the largest population country on the planet. And we have to encourage their reawakening, their emergence to the global stage and all the rest of that stuff. So fast forward, another Democratic president, Bill Clinton, saying this. Yeah, before China became a member of the World Trade Organization, Congress would have to vote on permanent normal trade relation status for China. And some of those debates on the floor of Congress became very acrimonious. Some people were very concerned about China becoming part of the global economy with no restraints at all by the United States. The only restraint would be in the form of an international organization called the World Trade Organization with its own set of rules. This was a monumental day in world history, a monumental day in our collective lifetime as well. Most people don't remember this. Why? If you look at the date in the background there on that big poster, it's November 11th, 2001, 2 months to the day after September 11th, 2001. So at that time, we were still focused on what happened on 9/11. And we're thinking about the war on Islamofascism, or whatever we will call it. We weren't really thinking too much. Maybe we weren't thinking too seriously about what China's admission to the World Trade Organization might mean for the United States and the rest of the world. But of course, they're all toasting. Yes, you can't shut China out from the rest of the world forever. Maybe Richard Nixon taught us that lesson, but anyway, here is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was preceded by two other leaders of China who, between Deng Xiaoping and he, were not all that remarkable, noteworthy, famous, even infamous. And then along comes Xi Jinping, and you can see he's been in power for more than a decade. And I expect that he will be the leader until he's no longer physically able or mentally able to do it. But he is he's different than his predecessors, no doubt about it. He is antagonizing the rest of the world, but he also represents an alternative to a lot of the rest of the world who doesn't see that same alternative or opportunity in the American way of ordering the world economy. He has firm beliefs that China has a different way of doing things, and he doesn't really care if China is not supporting democracies throughout the world, as the United States certainly did during the Cold War. And even until relatively recently, the United States supported democracies throughout the world. And one way to undergird that was to try to include them in the world market based on capitalism. So maybe you can see this one, but Xi Jinping said China's great rejuvenation is now an, quote, irreversible historical process, and the party, meaning the Chinese Communist Party, had already created a new choice for humanity with its unique path to modernization, a nod to China's emergence as an alternative to Western democracies. Spot on. That is what it is. So here's another realist, John Eikenberry, a name that might also look familiar. He was in previous Great Decisions chapters, as the author of those chapters. But he's right. This is fact. This is not some kind of alternative fact or something. No, this is a fact. And it is just astounding if you think about it. 100 countries in the world have twice as much, not similar amounts, but twice as much trade with China as they do with the United States. So China is certainly won in that case. If you think about that earlier slide that showed the Time magazine cover, China's won. But now the United States is trying to catch up. And what are we going to do? Well, China has far more than the comparable Tesla. Tesla is dominating the EV market in the United States, but China has dozens of EV manufacturers. And sooner or later, things are just going to sort themselves out. Some will go by the wayside, that's for sure. But we've seen fits and starts with a lot of our American car manufacturers and that are focused on EVs and solely EVs. They've gone bankrupt. And Tesla is the one that's surviving, and Tesla is now a worldwide brand. But anyway, the day is going to happen. It's inevitable that we are going to see Chinese cars on American streets. We don't yet, but we will. And I expect most of those, if not all of those, will be EVs. So we're trying to figure out how to stop it. Are tariffs going to do this? Here is a very interesting take on things. I blew this up for you so you could see this here. And it starts from the warning from Yellen. So Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese products, but Joe Biden's administration did him one better. Yeah. Yeah. Also during the Biden administration. So I guess the takeaway for all of us is we can't assume that one political party is going to be more in favor of liberalizing the world economy in contrast to the other political party in our two-party political party system. We just can't. We also recognize the profound influence of China on a lot of our foreign policy decisions. And I think this is spot on too. Xi Jinping warned that China wouldn't be bullied. And this is the rhetoric that was coming out of Washington, D.C. when Joe Biden was the president. Yeah, so I blew up the bar graph for the next slide. But Russia is a rogue state through its invasion of Ukraine. The world police, I guess, led by the United States, said, we're not going to trade with Russia anymore. But as Dresner told us, well, that got very complicated very quickly because Russia supplies a lot of oil to the rest of the world. And how are you going to finagle that? How are you going to be hypocritical about that in a way? Well, China, again, doesn't really care about another country invading a third country. China really doesn't care about democratic rights and fostering democracy throughout the world, to say it bluntly. And you can see the amount of business that China was doing with Russia before and after the invasion of Ukraine. There's Turkey led by Erdogan, as we know. But yeah, people are still doing business with Russia. And the United States can't stop that, honestly. When I saw this, I thought, boy, this is just interesting. I have a similar personality to yours. Putin tells Xi Jinping, what exactly does that mean? They have a common foe in the United States. They want to reorder the world order. Is that what it means? Well, then we get this very simplistic notion by the first administration, Donald Trump, when he still had a Twitter account. And I highlighted it here, and it's referenced, but this is actually the verbiage that he used. It's referenced in the Dresner article. It's easy, really, really. Yeah, if only. Again, a legacy of the first administration of Donald Trump. This is from 2018. Trump's tariff vow rattles markets. If you invest, and I'm assuming all of you do to some degree, if only through a retirement account, don't open up your account statements, because in the last 10 days, your account balances have probably taken a hit, unless you are not in equities at all. But anyway, yeah. So Trump's present tariff vows of 2025 are certainly rattling the markets. The markets don't like uncertainty, as we know. And what is that Chinese vice premier saying or thinking to himself right there? Boy, this person is different. Guess. But now he's at it again. This is from 2018. And fast forward now, almost to the day, 7 years later, Donald Trump is fixated on steel and aluminum. If you don't have steel, you don't have a country. Really? Really? It sounds so similar to Mao's Great Leap Forward when he tried to make steel in a country that had no industrialization. And he thought, well, we've got to have steel. From my reading of the great powers of the world throughout history, they've all been steel manufacturers, the British steel mills in Manchester and other places, and the United States certainly. So we've got to make our own steel. Well, what happened? The quality of the steel that was produced in those backyard blast furnaces was abysmal. It was not usable, but he believed in it. Look at that beautiful hulking guy and beautiful hulking I-beam. And that's telling us the Great Leap Forward in Chinese is going to produce all this great wealth for our people and whatever. It's not going to happen. So here we go. I thought maybe at this point in my presentation, you needed a little bit of levity. So Mao plus Trump, loving steel, both of them, equals Trumao. Not really. But yeah, as Kay said, I teach courses in Asian politics and I subscribe to Asian Newsweek. So this says Trump wa owaranai, which means Trump is not finished. And this is from 2021, well before people imagined that he would be reelected. But this person holding up this poster in the sea of a rally says, not a perfect man, but a man perfect for the job. And then what happens? Well, soon after he is reelected, it says Mata Tora. Mata means again, and Tora is how Japanese people would somehow pronounce the first part of Trump. But Tora also means tiger in Japanese. So again, it's Trump, or again, it's the tiger. Japanese people are a little bit worried about what Donald Trump might do. He's, of course, focused on the US-Japan Security Treaty many times, saying that Japan doesn't pay its fair share for Americans who are stationed in Japan and, in the US military. But yeah, here we go again. Donald Trump is rolling out 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. Is that going to make US steel manufacturers stronger? US steel, as we all know, was a target for buying out by Nippon Steel. And then we saw the nativism kick in. If it had been a British steel manufacturer, would we have seen that same response? I don't know. But again, it's not just Donald Trump concerned about what's going to happen to our country if we don't have steel manufacturing. I remember when this happened, Biden blocked the sale of US steel to Nippon Steel. And so do you. It just happened in January. Yeah. So we can, in the form of Donald Trump and the Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, all the other departments that are involved, we can say we're going to tariff the heck out of Chinese products, but China's not just going to stand by and take it. They're going to do something. And is it going to hurt us? Well, maybe it will. Are they going to restrict our access to rare earth elements, which right now essentially are just not as great as they once were, but they're on a slow path to dormancy or prohibition, I think. Yeah, so China stacks, this is Xi Jinping putting people in positions of authority. He's putting people who are knowledgeable, who are technocrats in his government offices. And he has the right to do that, just like our president has the right to appoint RFK Jr. in the Department of Health and Human Services and Linda McMahon for the Department of Education, and people who have good ratings on Fox News or whatever, he can put them in power. But Xi Jinping is putting people who know what the hell is going on in power. There's no denying that China is implicit in the fentanyl trade that is a scourge on the US population. And it is so sad to watch people who have become addicted to fentanyl. But China knows full well what's happening. And Donald Trump claims that part of the reason why he's going to impose tariffs on China is to stop the trade in fentanyl. He's also claiming that imposing tariffs on Mexico and Canada is also going to stop the fentanyl trade, but the flow of migrants to the United States, is it going to do that? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But when I saw this headline, I said, I've got to cut this one out and scan this one because tragically, this one is a keeper. Just look at the headline. Fentanyl seized by DEA is enough to kill all in the United States. That's 330 million people, plus or minus. And this is only the amount that has been seized. Think about all the amounts that haven't been seized and are on the market for people to consume. So we've got to stop it. And maybe Donald Trump is right. And that's the first time I've said that in a long time. And certainly the first time I've said it today. If somehow using tariffs as a tool of foreign policy to get China out of the fentanyl trafficking, that would be well worth it, I think. So yeah, the United States, I guess, is exporting a lot of guns, and this is not new. But when we see the tragedy that's happening in Mexico, drug cartels shooting at each other in broad daylight, taking what are called, collateral damage. I hate to use that word. That's a Timothy McVeigh phrase. But collateral damage, that's how they're considered by the drug lords. Oh, we killed a couple of innocent bystanders or people who are running for their life. Doesn't matter to me. We're going to control this neighborhood. We're going to be the ones who are going to move the drugs through here and whatever else. Horrible, absolutely horrible. They couldn't do that unless they had the drugs or the guns. And supposedly, Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, claims that those drugs are coming, or the guns are coming from the United States. We're going to stop that. So here's my last thoughts. What is driving this shift, this paradigm shift in the world economy? And these ideas are global domestic. What do I mean by that? Every nation state on the planet, for the most part, is dealing with these issues, but especially the developed countries of the world. So these would be the OECD countries. And these are not necessarily international or foreign policy related, but just here we go. Here's the first one. When I put this slide up for my classes, a lot of people roll their eyes and they probably go home and tell their parents, or they text their parents and they say, oh my God, my professor is so out of touch. He's using articles from the last millennium, which this certainly is. This is from 1999. But when I saw this, I just thought, wow, America's 400 richest people surpass $1 trillion market net worth collectively. Holy smokes, 400 people control $1 trillion. Well, fast forward boom, 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 to 2025, so almost or now 2024, so this is 25 years later. 4 people in the United States control almost $1 trillion, just 4 people. I guess you could say, well, those are the capitalist titans, and we need those people in our life, and they're the visionaries, and they take risks and all the rest of that stuff. But man, oh man, how long is this going to last? And you can see how much their net worth increased over just the course of 4 years. Yeah, I'm all for people being successful, but I think we see the rise of populism in part because of these very stark numbers that are presented on this screen. And we also saw this when Donald Trump was inaugurated, who was standing in the front row. All these people, the people, here is Doug Burgum in the background. I think that's him. former governor of North Dakota, now in charge of the Department of Interior. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, here are the people that are in the background. But here's Mark Zuckerberg. You can see there's Bezos, there's Elon Musk. Why are they there at the inauguration? Is it this cozy relationship between the Oval Office and the titans of corporate America, the tech moguls, as it says there? I don't know. Some of you are econ people, and you've probably heard of the Gini coefficient. Well, of course, if you're an econ person, you have, but it's an expression of the distribution of income in a country during any certain period of years or whatever it is. And it's a number between 0 and 1. 0 means that everybody has exactly the same income. 1 means that only one person controls all of the income. And the World Bank always says that once you hit a 0.4 or greater, then you see envy, then you see conflict, and you see people who aren't going to just take it. But we've seen a couple of those moments where we've gone over 0.4 in the past, but more recently now you can see we are consistently over 0.4. That doesn't bode well for the future of income distribution in our country, because even though it's a cliche, it's proven true time and again, the rich do get richer. And there you go. If you subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, you probably saw this. This was just earlier this week. The US economy depends more than ever on rich people. Top 10% of earners account for almost 50% of all spending. So while some people are struggling at their 9-to-5 jobs and very glad that they got bumped up to $18 an hour, what is their circumstance going to be? How much job security do they have in that job? Can they pay the bills in that job? Well, I guess people in the other part of the economy don't have to think about that too much. So here's my number 2 explanation for why we are seeing a reordering of the world economy. The amount of government debt in most countries is certainly unsustainable, and Japan leads the list. You can find the same information. This one, even though it's a little dated, it is still accurate. Japan is on top of the list. On some charts, Sudan is at the very top of the list, but China is way down the list here. China is not so worried about economic catastrophe, which I think we should be, what we used to call back in the Cold War, this debt overhang. China's way down here on the list. It has been relatively conscious and conscientious, and some would say appropriately responsible with its money. They have a lot of future problems, no doubt, but I'll tell you about that in a bit. But anyway, Japan and the United States are way up there. How are we going to pay for this debt that exists? And as we know, recently it was reported that just the servicing of that debt has actually become greater than the entire military budget of the United States. That's a problem. Yeah, Japan has really seen a collapse of its economy. Here's number 3. Number 3, why are we seeing a reordering of the world economy? Well, this is inevitable. This is just pure demographics. What at one time was a world led by mostly advanced nation states and their populations is going to give way to countries that are presently underdeveloped or developing world economies. We're going to see India again. That's almost the only consistent across the board. India is going to be the world's most populous nation state. China, we know that, but then we see these other countries that are going to have very large populations. And in other countries, we are seeing a problem where people aren't going to have as many children. So these are Scandinavian countries. South Korea is number 1 on this list, where it's really a depopulation crisis, but Japan is right behind. Italy has problems. If not for immigration, the United States would have a drastic depopulation problem now. But this is a problem. This is just an inevitable reality that we're all realizing. And this is another problem too. A lot of people don't hope the best for their futures because of the people who are in positions of authority to allocate resources and values, which is what the government does. They have the authority to decide what is more important than something else. Yeah, I know a lot about Japan, and I could understand the cynicism of Japanese voters, but to see so many Americans just essentially give up hope and say, well, you know, I really don't trust my politicians to do what's right. It's nice to see some of these other people are given high marks, but politicians, they're different from police officers. Yeah, they enforce the law, but they are the ones who are making the laws, and they're the ones who have the big picture vision, supposedly. So that's my last one. I was told to talk for about an hour, and it is exactly an hour right now. So I thank you all for your commitment and your attentiveness and any questions and discussion items you'd like to think about. So thank you, everybody at Ole University of Minnesota. Thank you.
So we do have one in the question, the Q&A, so people can start populating that a little bit
Okay.
more. But can you hazard any thoughts on long-term consequences of the Trump pullback from alliances?
Oh, that's a great question. Can I hazard any guesses? Yes, I think that if there is something similar to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the world isn't going to turn its attention to the US first and foremost. And I'm really hoping that Europe will pick up the slack in the form of NATO or even the EU if we're thinking about economics, and they're going to come in and take the place of an absent United States, because I really do think that Donald Trump has turned his back on alliances unless they're going to benefit the United States. And he has consistently said that we are being taken advantage of in every alliance that we are part of. Just think about the United Nations, for example, the most recent vote, the resolution that condemned the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine. And Donald Trump said, we're not going to support that. Well, the international community knows what the history is, but now he's embarked on some kind of revisionist history saying Ukraine brought it on themselves to be invaded by Russia. So it was truly a low point in US foreign policy when the United States turned its back on Ukraine in such a symbolic way. But Donald Trump essentially says, well, a UN resolution doesn't matter. Well, in that case, it certainly does matter. It does tell the world that the rest of or the United States really doesn't care that much about commitments or anything. So that's a great question. The alliance and the erosion of alliances, the fraying of those commitments, that is a concern. Think about global problems, for example. You know, now we're out of the Paris Treaty. Again, it's back and forth, but these global problems that are going to demand the attention, the commitment of so many people, not just in the Oval Office, out of the Oval Office, in Congress, out Congress, whatever, but this consistency, something like climate change, whether or not you believe it, but the younger generations clearly believe it. That's what we have to recognize. And the only way we can combat something like climate change would be for everybody collectively to say, yes, we are going to do something about it. But we haven't, especially as the United States, we haven't committed to that. And that for me is a problem. Or terrorism. It's been a while since we've seen a full-on ISIS attack, but how are we going to combat global terrorism if we don't do that through alliances? You just can't do it single-handedly. Sharing of information and other things, it's going to require people to work together. But Donald Trump essentially thinks we don't have to work with others. That's just very close-minded, short-sighted. So thank you for that question.
So what do you think crypto is good for, ignoring Trump's coin?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. And I think you're asking me that just to add some humor to it. What is crypto good for? Supposedly those Bitcoins that are being mined, there's a limited number of those. And we know that there's also competitors to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is now the focus of the market, maybe because it was first in, I don't know. But there's all these other things prior to Doge being the Department of Government excessive, whatever we're going to call it, excessive frustration. But Elon Musk threw that out there. We're going to have a Dogecoin, and he created a Dogecoin, and suddenly the value of this thing that was not tied to any fixed asset suddenly had some kind of inherent value, and people kept bidding up the value of Dogecoins. So what is cryptocurrency good for? Well, the original objective of Bitcoin was to sidestep the tax authorities and other people. It was part of the dark web, so people could conduct financial transactions without having to have any documentation for those. And then it became more normalized and accepted. And I think it's inherently a speculative investment slash speculative adventure. I've seen a lot of people lose a lot of money in gambling, and I think that gambling and cryptocurrency are in the same boat. Maybe they're in a different level of the deck chairs on that boat or something, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really think that cryptocurrency is a long-term stable asset. Yeah, yeah, that's just me. And if you have cryptocurrency, got best of luck. And people, supposedly if you invested $1,000 in crypto in the form of Bitcoin in 2011, not even 2001, 2011. So do the math. This is about 14 years ago. $1,000 of Bitcoin then is worth $365 million today. Not $365,000, $365 million. So maybe it's just me and sour grapes. And I'm mad that I didn't take the plunge at that time. And I'm just speaking badly about crypto. But yeah, Donald Trump, no doubt about it. He's an ardent supporter of crypto. And that's why he was pump and dump, like they say. But anyway, yeah, thank you for that question or comment.
Okay. Going to tell everyone, pick up a pencil or pen
Mhm.
because someone wants you to repeat the email address for
Oh,
requesting the slides of
oh,
today.
that's very kind. Thank you. Well, I told you how to find me, but this is a good idea. If you do lose the pen and paper, just remember that I teach at Gustavus. And all of you, I'm assuming, unless you're out of state, you've heard of Gustavus. So you just have to type in Richard, which is my first name. And I'm assuming there was some kind of publicity about my talk today. So if you go back and find it, Richard, and then type in Gustavus. You don't even need to put my last name, and I will appear on your screen. But my contact email is RLEIT as in Thomas, C as in cat, H, R Leitch at Gustavus. Gustavus is spelled Gus as in Sam, T as in Thomas, A, V as in Victor, U, S as in Sam, and then that's .edu. So rleach at gustavus.edu.
Yep. And if you didn't get that or you lose it, this is being recorded. It will
Oh,
be
great.
up on the Ollie website and
Nice.
also the library website in approximately a week.
Oh, it's how I thought it was Oli. It's Ollie. Excuse me,
Yeah, but
Ollie.
it's Olli.
Right. I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. Okay, thank you. Ollie. Well, that's good. I'll remember that now. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Some are now saying Trump's actions will implode and we need to just hold our breath and the pendulum will swing. Is this
Ah.
based on former voting practices, do you think, or is the paradigm shift too extreme to be undone now?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I'm not even sure if we've really seen a paradigm shift, if we're in the early stages of that. I don't know, but to say such a thing as I just said, I would have to imagine that there are going to be very competent people to take those positions of authority after Donald Trump is no longer there. So in other words, was the Trump into Biden into now back to Trump just an aberration? Or are we really seeing some profound changes in the international world order and world economy? Um, I'm with this person, whoever weighed in there. I'm just holding my breath. I'm not doing anything rash. I just know that in 3+ years, he's going to be gone unless he tries to do something truly unconstitutional and says he's going to run for a third term because FDR did it and he was allowed, and who knows? But I really hope that people will come to the fore and say, we want to restore America, and to use this bad rhetoric, make America truly great again, where allies can count on us, and we are going to be bold in helping people have better quality of life throughout the world. But I don't think we're doing that right now. I think that we've withdrawn from the world stage only because of Donald Trump and all of his minions. And I did use that word purposefully there. Um, yeah, so thank you for that question or that comment, person, whoever gave it. But yeah, I think we should just hold our breath. And maybe, this sounds like the end of Gone with the Wind, but brighter days are ahead. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So is capitalism a problem that we need to change or modify?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, when I hear about the Donald Trump tax cuts of 2017, and in part of the $2 trillion is going to re-up those tax cuts, which have supposedly benefited even the middle class and blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, that's fine. I guess, you know, if we didn't see a continuation of those tax cuts, how much would it hurt us next April 15th? I can't tell you that. I think it would be pretty severe. Would it be as much as what we are going to see with tariffs that are imposed on trading partners? I can't tell you that. But what really frustrates me is when people who already have billions of dollars in net worth are going to get a tax break. And the idea, as we all know, implied by trickle-down economics, is that they're going to use that money to invest it. And maybe some of that $250 billion of Elon Musk's net worth is truly invested, no doubt, SpaceX and Tesla and everything else. But how much of it is just hoarded in monetary assets of some sort that's not invested? Does he really need a tax break? I don't think so. And so if they could reorient that discussion and the focus and think about people who really, really are having a tough time of just making bills, you know, that's just so sad. It shouldn't happen in this country. And yeah, I've also heard the counter argument that yes, X percentage of our country pays 90% of the tax bill, and they're the ones who should get the tax breaks and all that. But is capitalism something that should be reoriented, something that should be um, tinkered with? Some of my students, you know, here I am at Gustavus, and they've got such a sense of despair. We were just thinking about this on Wednesday. And they just, you know, they're not like, rah, rah, let me out in the workplace, man. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to be the next person who comes up with something ingenious. And I'm going to burn the midnight oil and work 20 hours. And I'm going to, you know, they're not doing that. They're just thinking, boy, I am so in debt. I'm going to have to take a job that really isn't fulfilling just so I can keep up with my student loan indebtedness. It's going to be hard for me to find any place to live. Forget about buying a single family home. All this really, you know, talk of despair. And I'm trying to pump them up. You can do it. Every generation goes through this. You know, heck, I had to live through the Cold War, people. You can survive this momentary blip, but they don't see it as that. And so they are very down on capitalism, and especially what they believe is the hoarding of wealth by just a few people that they don't see as really creating anything for society. Not thinking about Larry Ellison and all the people that he employs at Oracle. You know, they don't think that. They just think Larry Ellison's got so much money and he's involved in selling boats and whatever else. But yeah, yeah. So anyway, good point. But that's a great question. We are so thick into capitalism. There's no way we can get rid of capitalism unless we are truly going to see some Marxism provoked revolution where the proletariat change themselves to the means of production and takes over factories and all that, when violence is used against capitalists. And no, we don't want to do that. But I don't know what we're going to look like 30 years from now, honestly.
Do you
No.
see anything positive at all in the disruption that's happening in Washington?
Oh, that's a great question. Do I see anything positive? Well, I've had many Gustavus alums work for USAID, and I know the good work that they were doing. And I've got two students right now who are off to the Peace Corps, both to the same destination, coincidentally. And both of them are accepting that with trepidation, not knowing if their Peace Corps contracts will be honored. And at some point, if they're actually on the ground, they'll be sent back home. They don't know that. But for the USAID people, who are actually there in Washington, D.C., and sometimes shuttled out to other places, their lives must just feel so dejected right now. In many cases, it's not just those temporary hires who were there just, you know, like as an intern to see if they were going to fit and whatever. No, their whole career was dedicated to USAID. And you know, the government efficiency group of Elon Musk can say, we got rid of a lot of dead wood. And, you know, again, going back to the idea of turning our back on alliances, those people on the ground through USAID, and I've talked to a lot of those people, not just Gustavus graduates, but, you know, as have many of you. and the stuff that they do day after day in parts of the world that people don't want to go. And they're advancing the goodwill of the United States, and we just, just cut them off. It just seems so wrong. Yes, every organization is going to have some people who are redundant workers, and maybe their heart isn't in it anymore. They're just counting down the days to retirement or whatever you want to say about it. But just to slash all these people, it just seems so heartless. So yeah, I don't see anything, honestly, anything good about what's happening right now. If they could encourage people to take early retirement and maybe not fill certain jobs, but just to slash X number of people and demand, you think that you have the authority to have access to people's hard drives and find out all this data on employees and force people to tell you what they've done over the weekend and all this other ridiculous stuff. It's just bad, bad, bad. So anyway, yeah, I think we're maybe done. I don't see Kay on the screen anymore.
Looks like we might have lost Kay, but I can
Hey,
hop in and
okay,
ask some more questions here.
okay, sure, Grayson, go for
Let's
it.
see. Here's a question about singularity and the end of scarcity. UBI, I think Universal Basic Income. Any thoughts about this in the news?
Oh, oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that question about UBI. UBI has been tried in some communities in the United States. For example, Stockton, California had a UBI experiment. Some nation states have taken a group of people across their country, like Finland had a UBI experiment. And from what I understand, the people who were the beneficiaries of UBI could actually breathe, as cliche, as trite as that might sound, but they could actually keep their head above water. And they said, this is really nice. Every month I'm getting X $100 or whatever the amount was. And they just really felt that they could do something with their life that they would enjoy instead of thinking about that ominous bill that's going to come in the mail every single day of that every month. And yeah, so UBI, I think, there's some merit to UBI based on the studies I've read. But of course, then there are going to be the people who are going to denigrate anything different because, of course, it's new. And oh my gosh, there might be people who take advantage of it. You always have to think about what's called the moral hazard whenever you implement a new policy. So are we going to get a bunch of people who just sit around and do nothing, and we're going to end up developing the worst vices of humanity, which is just sitting around as lazy people? And is that gonna happen? Well, I guess you could work in some kind of qualifications for UBI, but then it truly wouldn't be universal. So yeah, how are we gonna pay for it? You might remember Andrew Yang when he was a candidate for the nomination for the presidency, and he was all about UBI. And he had some very intriguing ideas, but some people have also said, well, if you have something like UBI, it's going to be such a costly program that something's going to have to give. And is that going to be all or part of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, the biggest entitlements we have in our government budget at the national level? Is that what's going to have to give? Well, that really doesn't seem fair for people who have already contributed and counted on those programs to take from them or totally eliminate from them to give to UBI. So I am totally open-minded about UBI, but I would really like to see more studies about UBI. But that's a very, very interesting comment. And many of you are probably familiar with the concept as well. And maybe if you do contact me by email, we can have a little bit of a back and forth through email, or we could even Google Meet and talk about UBI. I'm assuming there are some economists in this group among us, and then you can tell me more about what you think. But yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question, whoever asked it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back, but I
Oh,
can't see
hi.
the Q&A.
Oh, good.
I can't see the
Oh,
Q&A.
you can't see the Q&A. Well, so Grayson just asked a question from the Q&A, so maybe he can keep doing that.
Sure,
That would,
yeah. I can let's jump into This one here, if NAFTA helped the US overall economically but led to more inequity, how can we do global interdependence right? What about subsidies for industries like computer chips, export controls, etc.?
Wow. Wow, that's a great question too. That is a really great question. How can we do a global economy right if NAFTA led to so much deprivation and other things in people's lives? You know, this is truly and wholly a cynical comment, but I think because capitalism is a global system, I think capitalists have more in common with each other across the planet than they do with their own citizens in many cases, unless those people are at that level of capitalism that they are. So yeah, we've got the mom and pop small shop entrepreneurs. Those aren't the capitalists I'm thinking about right now. So those big household name famous capitalists, are they really in it for the right reasons? Is their heart in it? Are they going to try to figure out how to make things equitable? Are they certainly have the president's ear now? If our president were to say, let's join a new trade agreement and let's come up with something that is like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you might remember that idea, truly global, not regional. So it wouldn't just be the USMCA round two. But how can we do that? That's the compelling question. How can we do that? How can trade be beneficial for as many people as possible, but also so the benefits of it will be equitable? And then you've got to define equitable. And of course, the capitalists are going to say we're taking a risk by fronting the money to make this all happen in the first place. And there should be a payoff for us. These questions are great. They really are great. I'm going to have to mull over these all weekend while I'm living my life. But the second part of that, now I hope I don't sound incoherent because that question is on the back of my mind, as were the other comments. But the other question was about subsidies. And if we were to target certain industries, like the Inflation Reduction Act did, that was Joe Biden's legacy piece of legislation. You might remember that. If we were to target certain industries and encourage their development through subsidies, a lot of our trade partners claim that that's an unfair advantage to those industries whose members are going to compete abroad. So in other words, if the United States is subsidizing a solar panel company and we make it more efficient, cost effective for them to produce that solar panel, and then we export it to a third country, well, those other competitors that are trying to get into that or are already presently in that third country are going to cry foul. They're going to say, that's undercutting us in this market. And they'll probably bring that dispute to the World Trade Organization, because sanctions, I think, have a place to play, but then we've also got to think about the rules. So how could we do that in such a way where we aren't truly calling them sanctions and they don't have all of the bite of a sanction in a positive way, but they still are going to achieve the desirable outcome, where you find something that's important, that's fledgling, and then you devote capital from the government to encourage its development. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of companies are subsidized, certainly, not just in the United States, but throughout the world.
And here's another one, talking about NATO. Do you think NATO is impotent or useless without U.S. support?
Wow. Is NATO impotent or useless without US support? Well, you might remember in the closing days of the Cold War, a lot of people thought that NATO was going to be useless, that there was no need for NATO now that the bad, evil empire of the Soviet Union was no longer. And there were a couple of moments there in those meetings with the ministers meeting in NATO consultations, and they were talking among themselves. Maybe we can remake NATO and think of another aspect for NATO. Not that it's going to be a full-on EU kind of thing that's going to promote economic interdependence, but there could be an economic component to NATO in some way, lower level than what the EU is. But without US support in NATO, boy, oh boy, that would be troubling. I can't imagine what NATO might look like because of the amount of the budget that the US supports for NATO. But also all of those other member nation states have to kick in money too, as we know. And that's based on their military budgets, their own, domestic budget process. But yeah, what would NATO be able to achieve? Well, without the United States, I'm not quite sure what. It would still do something. It would still exist as an organization, but would it be able to respond to crises similar to what we saw with the Russian invasion of Ukraine? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Would it be something like Sarajevo back in the early 1990s, where NATO was certainly on board in that effort? I don't know. But I do know a lot of people, including Donald Trump, but he's not alone, just think that NATO is just so outdated, so unnecessary. If you want things to happen, you just got to take the bull by the horns, and you don't need all these bureaucrats to be sitting around writing reports that prognosticate about future military something that aren't even going to be read. Yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine NATO being really functioning to the degree that it is now, even though the United States is in full on with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. But I can't imagine it functioning to even this somewhat dysfunctional state without the United States in it. I just can't see that. A lot of European economies are dealing with a lot of crises right now. We used to look at Germany as the leader of Western Europe, and then subsequently, when there was no East and West Europe, of all of Europe, and people had great hopes in Angela Merkel's ability to lead and all the rest of this stuff. Now, Germany is a basket case. It really is. And don't let this recording go to the Germans. It's, a country I certainly admire, but in present times, Germany is far different than the Germany of 1992, when they were trying to figure out how to integrate East Germany. But now it's just got so many problems. So would they be the ones who would say, we're going to step up and we're going to support NATO? Or would it be the French? Are they going to do it? I don't know.
How about
Yeah.
the idea of the US dollar remaining as a world currency or other alternatives? What are your thoughts on sort of developments there, or what you see happening?
A great question. Well, for our entire lifetime, I'm just assuming the age of people listening to this now, but the US has always been, or US dollar has always been the world's reserve currency. I don't know what would replace it, honestly. I don't see people thinking that the Chinese yuan would be a replacement. I would think that that could be the logical replacement for it, or maybe not a full-on replacement, but an alternative to it. Again, considering what we saw earlier, that more than 100 countries on the planet have twice as much trade with China as they do with the United States. So we could imagine that somehow there would be a more significant role for the Chinese yuan to play as a quasi-reserve currency. But right now, thinking back on that chart, the EU is not even close to what the United States is. I think it's 3 times less than what the United States is as a reserve currency, the US dollar. So at some point, though, here's another thing. What happens if all heck comes, true, and we've got a $37 trillion national debt right now, and we're not able to finance it, despite all of these people who call themselves modern monetary theorists, all of them in the econ realm of academia, some of them saying, oh, we could just keep printing dollars and all of this indebtedness will just pay back with deflated dollars. It really doesn't matter. We all know that's not going to happen. If that were to happen, our economy would be in a tailspin. We're already printing enough dollars. But what's going to happen if that $37 trillion is no longer sustainable? And we just see the progression of how it's just morphed into what it is presently. You really want to lose some sleep at night, type in on Google national debt clock, and they show you all of these different debts that we're dealing with. And it just goes faster than you can blink. And that's now, as we know, for the first time in our country's history, larger, just to service the debt, larger than the entire military budget. and it's not going to reverse anytime soon. I don't know if the military budget is actually going to outpace the service on the national debt. I don't think that's going to happen, even if Donald Trump is saying we're going to build more aircraft carriers. But this could be a problem, that the rest of the world might say this reserve currency is essentially worthless because the United States has reached this point where it's no longer able to back up its word financially, that all these IOUs that we have in the form of treasury bills, bonds, and notes are no longer guaranteed by the US government because it now missed an interest payment and it's technically in default. And then we would see our interest rates rise, to use a to use a Donald Trump slogan, like we've never seen before. Believe me, believe me. If the US is insolvent, it would be hell to pay. And then the US would have no role as a reserve currency in the world. So yeah. Thank you for those questions. Any other comments we have?
One last quick question.
Sure.
Isn't chaos bad for business?
Yeah.
Why would US companies invest in new factories here now?
Oh, that's a good question. Why would anybody invest in the US in new factories now? Very good question. I guess it depends on what type of factories they're investing in, but also the OECD tells us that the United States economy is the only one that's showing any glimmer of expansion. Even despite whatever's happening in the present in Washington, D.C., there's this underlying movement of any nation state's economy. And ours seems to be on the upward trajectory in contrast to other economies that have flatlined or in fact are decreasing somewhat. So maybe those people are seeing positive currents in whatever they're analyzing, and they're saying now is a good time to do it. I guess historically interest rates, even though compared to the sub-3 mortgage interest rates that some of you might have, interest rates right now are not unbearable. They certainly aren't as bad as when Jimmy Carter was in his last years of the presidency and when Ronald Reagan in the first and second year of his presidency. So if you're investing for the long term and you're taking out some kind of loan, it seems reasonable that you can make that payment if you have a very profitable venture in some kind of factories. Again, it depends on what you are producing. If you're producing high-tech stuff, there's no doubt the US is the world leader in high-tech stuff. So if you're in Palo Alto or somewhere in California, Santa Barbara, who knows where you're going to be, but there's going to be money to be made there. But other Midwestern factories that are producing whatever they are in a company of 500 people, those owners must have great hope in the future of the US economy. And that gives me hope also, because they do hire a heck of a lot of people. So yeah, that's a great point. So it's not all doom and gloom, people. That's what I'm saying. It's just a temporary glitch in things. But again, Dresner and other people are saying, no, it's not a momentary change. This is long term. This is structural. We're going to see a different type of economy in the future. And maybe everybody is going to hunker down as sovereign nation states. And they're just going to say, now we're just going to take it on individually, and we're going to see more economic nationalism throughout the world, much like we did before World Wars. So I hope that doesn't happen. So great, Kate,
Okay,
for
well,
that.
we've run out of time for questions.
Oh, thank
but
you.
a couple of things.
Okay.
We were talking about the briefing book a little
Yeah.
bit earlier, and
Yeah.
we do have 10 copies of the briefing book at the
Yeah.
library. They're currently in cataloging. They've gotten delayed
Nice.
because of retirement. But you can get on the Ramsey County Library website. You can request one of those because it is up on there. And as soon as they finish cataloging them, you would get a copy right away if you request one of the first 10. So definitely stuff to go back and read over and learn more about this. Looking forward to spring, where we'll be talking about American foreign policy in the Middle East, taking stock and looking ahead, and also the international cooperation on climate change, and see where we're at in April when those are going to be happening. Otherwise, we want to thank you, Richard, for just sharing
Sure.
your breadth and width of your knowledge. Just making us, I mean, I think we're leaving probably with more questions than we started
Yeah.
with, but that's good. We
Yeah.
need to keep questioning. So once again, thanks
Okay.
everyone for all of the great questions that you put in there. Thanks for putting up with us getting through all of our technical glitches. And you know what? Go out, have a good day. You can
Yeah.
still have a good day, and we will see you back here hopefully in the spring, everyone.
Thank you, Grayson, and thank you, Kay, and everybody else that was in attendance today. Thank you.
Mhm.